Hello, everybody. You're listening to Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs, and I'm your host, Shelby Olaschlager. Our mission here is to help entrepreneurs make a difference and navigate the messy world of startup or relaunch. Join me today where we dig deep with our guests to give you the best content and strategies to fast track your business. Today, our special guest is Mike, and I always make the mistake to not see about your last name. So you're going to have to tell your last name. But thank you, Mike, for joining us. And to get started, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I have a tough last name, so it's Jesowshek, and most people don't get it right away. But yeah, my name is Mike, and throughout my career, been in different types of entrepreneur journeys. So I started my first business at the age of 14, got into online marketing, and then from there, kind of got into different industries. Part of the online marketing industry had businesses where we had partners, had some businesses where I was out on my own, and just throughout that experience, just kind of started to experience different stages of that entrepreneur life cycle. And so that kind of brings me to where we are today. In 2013, I founded an accounting firm. So we do bookkeeping, taxes, payroll, that type of stuff for small businesses. And then more recently, where my time has been spent is we started a podcast 4 years ago called the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, where we share weekly tips on accounting tips, tax tips, things that are important to small business owners of all sizes, as well as we kind of have a training program that goes along with our podcast to kind of help people along that are really looking to just ways to save the most in taxes as possible.
That's awesome. Was this a bit of a natural transition from, learning as you're going through your own businesses to making a bit of a shift to now being more specific with the tax savings?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. When I first started the accounting firm, it was just accounting. So we didn't do any taxes or anything on that side. And what ended up happening is a lot of times clients would come with me with a question related to tax of some sort. And I'd reach out to connections that I have in the tax space. And I kept getting this answer of like, it depends. So I'd ask a question, they'd say, well, it depends. And I got frustrated with that because I'm like, I understand that it depends. I understand you can't give a blanket answer for everybody. But for most cases, there is kind of an answer. Like for 85% of the people, this is going to be your answer. And so I got to the point where I started kept asking, kept trying to learn, and got to the point where I was like, okay, I need to try to do this on my own. I need to try to learn these types of things on my own. And so just started to dig into tax savings and tax strategies on my side. And so that kind of got me to this area where we started the podcast, focus on tax savings. And, really, I say that kind of sparked from this idea is because I wanted to give answers out there that relate to majority of the people out there. So everything that we do, there is no like it depends answer. It's, here's for the most people kind of what the situation is. Now you might want to talk to your tax accountant and just verify that this makes sense in your scenario. But for the vast majority of people, kind of here is the answer you're going to have. And so that was kind of the approach that I have. It stumbled into something like that, whereas I couldn't get an answer. So I'm like, well, I'm going to have to learn this on my own. And if I was that business person, and I was an accountant, but if I was that person that kind of had those types of questions, there's probably other business owners that are sitting in that same space. And so that's why, on our podcast, everything is kind of geared out of a question. And that's really how we get a lot of our content is we have clients reaching out to us. We have people in our network reaching out to us with a question. And we're like, okay, well, that's a podcast episode. So let's start talking about that question in a podcast episode. And that's really kind of how that stemmed apart from it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think that is the easiest way to just get genuine, frequently asked questions. And if you're able to answer them, more than one person has that. So I think that's super cool. I'd like to backtrack a little bit just about some of your previous work that you've done that has kind of led you to here. So tell us a little about some of your earlier experiences as an entrepreneur and some of the things that you really learned along that journey.
Yeah. So, I first started out again at the age of 14 in an online marketing type business. So we did some online promotion of products and just started to get deeper into that industry. Eventually that business that I started, I ended up selling around the age of 18 for a small amount of money, but it was what I would call it an exit. And then from there, I got into a partnership. And so I joined forces with other people in the same industry. And in that partnership, one thing that we kind of learned is that that partnership would eventually led to me opening up the accounting firm was that partnership disbanded and people wanted to go in different directions. And so I think it was very clear to me that, okay, if I'm going to get into a partnership again, we need to make sure that the partners are aligned. The partners that are involved in it are aligned on kind of where the direction the company wants to go. Because at that time we had 7 partners and everyone kind of was a specialist in different areas, which was great because we could bring so much value to the table. Because, you wanted to learn about this type of online marketing, well, we have a guy for that. Or you want to learn about this, we have someone for that. But the problem with it is that as partners, we want to kind of grow that business in those specific areas that we were specialists in. And we were kind of taking one company and trying to pull it 7 different directions, which ultimately did not work out. And that's kind of where we went off on our own. So that was kind of, one big learning experience. Just if you're going to partner, I understand that there's good things and bad things about having partners in place, but if you're going to partner, just make sure that it's something that you're aligning kind of the people that are going to be involved into it, and just making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page of where's the direction of this company going. Like, let's not just look about tomorrow and making money, but where's this 5 years from now if we're successful, in 10 years if we continue that success. Because just getting off the ground, it's like, we just need to make money, so we don't care what's going on. That can be a part where all of a sudden you get 2 years into it, seeing success, and now you're having some of those struggles that could have potentially been avoided if talked about up front.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I could see that being a bit of a struggle, especially 7 people. I thought, partner 1 or 2, but 7 would be quite a lot.
Yeah, no, it was a lot. And then, after I left, we kind of disbanded that partnership. I started the accounting firm. As part of the accounting firm back in 2013, cloud accounting really wasn't a common thing that you see as frequently now, especially after COVID. But the problem that I faced with is we didn't have like a solid project management system that was kind of built for accountants working in the cloud. Because in 2013, I was fully virtual. That was the online marketing industry that I came from. That was kind of our first target. So we set out on a mission. We said, okay, let's build a project management software that is going to service exactly what we want it to do, and be able to serve other clients or other accounting firms as well that are looking to get into this cloud-based space. And so one thing, it took us 3 years to build that. And the problem with it is we were looking to have this perfect product or this perfect software piece. And that's why it took 3 years to build. But by the time we launched, there was 6 competitors on the market, all well-funded, that were not there when we first started. And so that was a clear indicator to me, as well as, you need to have kind of what we call an MVP, or minimal viable product. Bring something to market, get something out there so that you can at least get to gauge, is this something other people want, or is this just for me? And that allows you then to kind of shift focus. Like, there are features that we put into our software initially that the market didn't want. And so we probably wouldn't have spent 6 months developing that feature if we would have taken the time to kind of go to market with a not so robust software to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And just kind of like go with the flow with it, like mold it as you go almost, and see what the customers are wanting. And is that now did that like really base your accounting business on this software that you built?
No. So, the thing is with this kind of software is that there was no software out there when we started it. So it was a kind of a vital piece for us to operate in the cloud. But after launching 3 years later, the market fully saturated by different software that have much more funding to it. We made a decision, let's kind of cut off this software piece because we're too late to the game now, even though we might have been the first people legitimately to the game. Our final launch was, we were too late to the game. So what ended up happening is we used the software, loved it, worked great, but the amount of money to upkeep it and keep it running and tweak it and do everything else for just us, one user, didn't make sense. And so we ended up transitioning to, one of the other softwares out on the market. But like I said, I feel like that all could have been avoided, or at least could have taken completely dramatically different paths if we would have took that time to begin with and started to get our name out, started to get a software out at the beginning. Because I look at those other softwares now, and they have changed 360 degrees from where they first launched. And I think that's what we did a mistake, because we wanted to get to that final piece without even having a launch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that. And it's really refreshing to hear that, almost like just we need to just take action. And like you said, you weren't even marketing it, but you're building it almost behind the scenes. And I feel myself caught up in that a couple of times where it's like, oh, I have this thing, but you're keeping it locked up until it's ready. But then, like you said, when it's actually ready or you feel it's ready, it's a little too late. So I definitely appreciate that story. So now going back to some of the small businesses that you're helping, tell us a little bit about what that process is when you get a newer client. What are some of the common things that you really notice that they're doing that you could be saving them for their taxes?
Yeah, so it comes down to, a couple different pieces, and we have what we call a roadmap to tax minimization, but there's different steps to that and in how well or adapt a business is at that point. So we always say, one starting point is having a solid bookkeeping file. Whether you're a big business or a small business, at some point you're going to need some type of bookkeeping. And bookkeeping doesn't necessarily bring tax savings, but we call it kind of that core, that foundation of your business. And if we start to look at tax strategies and tax savings that we can put into place, we need to first have a foundation. We need to know, what are we working with? And I think that's where bookkeeping is something that we see so many small business owners either not doing, or they're doing it after the year's over just so that they can file their taxes, or maybe they're even doing bookkeeping, but they're just not utilizing it. Like, they're doing the work, but they're not taking those numbers, not looking into those numbers and diving into it. So we always say kind of a foundation is that bookkeeping piece. And then the next step is we need them to understand taxes and what tax planning actually is. So first off, understand taxes. Now, we don't expect anybody that we work with to be a tax professional or know everything, but we just need to let them know, to understand the basics. How is my income even taxed? What does that tax rate kind of look like? Do I need to pay estimated taxes quarterly? When do I pay my taxes? And so it's kind of that basic understanding that before we can even talk about tax planning, we need to have a little bit of a foundation of what taxes even are and how are they taxed. And then the tax planning piece is the next piece, where most people don't even know what tax planning is, or just think that it's too hard, it's for the rich, and it's not available to them. And so that's kind of a mindset shift that we're always looking at on the forefront of saying, okay, how can we change this thinking of, instead of when you think of taxes, most people think of taxes, they think of, okay, at the end of the year, I give my documents to my accountant, they file the return, and I move on to next year. And that's just simply just taking information and sending it up to the government. That's not saving taxes at all. And so we want to say, okay, let's look at what tax planning is. Let's change the mindset. When you hear tax, let's think of tax planning, because most tax strategies need to be implemented before the year's over. And then once the year's over, then you go ahead and file your tax return. But once the year's over, so many tax strategies get thrown out the door. And so that tax planning should always be coming first, and then tax preparation and filing would be that thing that's occurring afterwards. And so that's just kind of the mindset that we're looking to shift in small business owners that we're working with, is going from that, okay, let's build that foundation. Let's get that accounting. Let's understand the basics of tax. Let's understand what tax planning is. Now we can actually dive into implementing strategies, learning strategies, and kind of going from that point forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And I definitely think the foundation, whenever you think of taxes, I'm sure not the only one that thinks of, like, it's just something that you don't really look at, you don't really totally understand. And I like the idea of, it's not like you're just doing your taxes, but it's actually like the tax planning, like it's an actual thing that we should be way more aware of, I think. And like you just said, so with that, when you have been, is there one thing that you can say about the strategy that some business owners could start implementing right now that might help them get them on that path?
Yeah. So when we look at tax strategies, we have what we call our core tax strategies. These are going to be tax strategies that are easy to implement, easy to understand. Whether you're making $10,000 a year or $1 million a year, these strategies generally are going to be available to you. And then we have something called advanced tax strategies. Those are going to be more for the higher income earners, a little bit harder, a little bit more complex to understand. But we always say the first thing we want to do, regardless of with your $10,000 a year or $10 million a year, we want to be implementing our core strategies and utilizing them as much as possible. And once we've done everything that we can do in that core strategies, now we're going to look at advanced tax strategies and say, okay, how can we lower that tax bill immediately, over and above that? When we look at our core tax strategies, it starts down. Then again, build foundation again. How is our entity set up? Are we set up as an LLC, a sole proprietorship, a corporation? How is our entity set up? And that's going to kind of lay the groundwork. Okay, what are those next steps? And so, what we always say, the first tax strategy, or one of the easiest ones that business owners of any shape or size can do, is maximize deductions. And whenever I talk about maximizing deductions, I think this is such a missed place, because most people think, well, that just means I'm going to go out and buy stuff that I don't need for my business to get a tax deduction for it. I'm going to buy a new truck just to get a tax deduction this year and reduce my taxes. And we're saying, okay, that's not what maximizing deductions is. Maximizing deductions is taking spending that you're already doing and finding a business purpose for it and getting a pre-tax deduction. So, most of the times you get, if you're, let's say, just an employee of a company, you get your gross wages, all these taxes are taken out, and then whatever's left over is your net paycheck. And any spending you do on that is considered after-tax dollars. You've had your money's already been taxed, and now you're just going and spending that money that's already been taxed. But as a business owner, we have our sales or revenue, and then we have all these expenses that we can put into it. And then whatever's left over from there is what we're taxed on. And so it's this idea of saying, how can I move some of those after-tax dollars into pre-tax dollars? How can I find a business purpose for the spending, move it in from an after-tax dollar to a pre-tax dollar, and see savings there? And so that is where we kind of always start. And you'd be surprised about how many business owners are not taking advantage of that spending that they're already doing. Just kind of one example is hiring your kids. Now, if you have kids, you're supporting them, you're taking them to baseball camps, summer camps, you're letting them go on trips with friends, and you're supporting them with all these funds. And traditionally, you're just going to use after-tax dollars to help support your children through those things. But if we do a mindset shift, we can say, okay, how could we hire our kids in our business? What could our kids be doing in our business for a reasonable rate and for, the amount of time they're spending on it, get a business deduction for paying our kids pay no income taxes on it, and then let the kids pay for that kind of extracurricular activities that they want to do. And so that's just a very easy, low-hanging fruit example of, we're taking spending that we're already doing. Whether we're a business owner or not, we're going to do this spending, but now we're moving it from an after-tax spending to a pre-tax spending. And that's where the power of being a business owner really is how can we move a lot of that spending into pre-tax?
Wow. I like that. I was going to ask for an example. And I think that is a perfect example of just finding that way to like that is actually so cool. And I'm sure a lot of people would never even think about that. Cause yeah, it's like, you're already spending it. So let's spend it in a way that it's the pre-tax. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious now for your business and what you've done, how has it been as far as your own growth with saying like, okay, now I have the skill, like we help these businesses. How has that journey been with you guys, starting to become an established business and getting clients?
Yeah. So our journey has been, very crazy in the different ways that we've seen growth. But, when we first started out in an accounting firm, again, all we did was accounting. We grew from just being well known in that online marketing industry, having a good reputation in it. And that's where we grew. That's the industry I came from. That's where I grow. And we got to a point where like, okay, we want to maybe check out different industries. So we started to niche down into specific, other industries. We worked with attorneys, we worked with fitness studios, and really started to get specialized, because we noticed that the more specialized we are, the more advanced we are in a specific industry, the more that we can actually help that business owner out. So we can obviously do a bookkeeping and taxes for any industry, but if we really want to help them out, having that industry experience really kind of gives us another forefront into that space. And then it brings us to this point of a podcast. Mm-hmm. We've been growing our podcast for a long time, and it's very slow to start. You're putting up episodes, you're putting all this time into it, and you have 5 listeners, 6 listeners, and it's just slow growth until all of a sudden something catches on, and all of a sudden it starts to take off, and people are like, I want to hear more of the podcast. I want to do more topics. And then we start to realize the podcast is not just giving away free content. but it's also helpful for our own clients. Now when we have clients asking about how do I hire my kids, or what does maximizing deductions even mean, we can say, well, go check out this podcast, go check out this blog we did, and now you can learn more about it, and then let's connect on that. And so it's given our clients so much more insights into us. And then when they come to us with the questions, the value of that conversation is so much better, because we're not talking about the basics. We're not talking about the strategy. They've already learned that through a blog post or through a podcast episode. Now we're talking, okay, let's take that and let's expand it further. Okay, how is this specific to you? Where do we go from there? And it helps provide so much more. We also have a training program for those people that, maybe we're not working with directly, but they have another accountant, or they just want to learn about tax strategies, whatever it might be. We have a training program, and we launched our training program 6 years ago. We launched it 5 years ago. We launched 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So we continue to launch this training program. Never got traction at all. Finally, last year, we've launched it again, and we kind of renamed it, revamped it to what we think is providing more value, and everyone's loving it. And the training program is starting to take off again. So it's those struggles of, you have an idea and vision, you just think it's going to work right away. And so many times that we're experiencing, it doesn't. But we keep trying. We keep taking, okay, what did we learn there? We got no subscribers. We didn't even get someone to submit their email to us on launch 1. Let's look at launch 2. What do we do a little bit different? Until you get to a point where now we're gaining traction now. Let's see how we can now revamp and grow what we have now built and we now have customers into.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good message for people to just stay consistent. And if you believe in something, and this brings me to the next question, just having that really strong why and that strong reason why you're going to keep showing up, keep doing this. So for you and your business, what has been like the biggest why and motivator for wanting to help these small businesses with their taxes?
Yeah, I always say my mission is to help small business owners understand the tax strategies and tax savings that's available to them out there. I think that is the biggest single most piece that's missing, is that business owners think taxes are super complicated, and taxes are complicated. But so many of these strategies, and especially what we call our core strategies, so many of them are so easy to understand, so easy to implement, and provide instant savings regardless of your size. So many small business owners think, I'm too small for that, or I need to be a millionaire to really kind of start saving on taxes. And that's really not true either. So my mission is just kind of, how can I bring to the awareness of small business owners across the country or across the world about tax strategies that are available to them, how to implement them, and just help them understand that this is perfect for you, regardless of your business size. Tax planning is not just for the millionaires. Tax planning is not just for tax professionals. Regardless of your experience or size, tax planning is available to you.
For sure. And I think with having really good resources like what you've been providing is so helpful as well. And even what you said earlier, just bettering the conversations you're having with these people, because they've seen your free stuff and they've listened to your podcast. You have much richer conversations that aren't just about the basics. So going back to the podcast, tell us a little bit about what that was like, and how, if it's kind of evolved over time, or like who you interview, what the purpose of the podcast is.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. When we first started the podcast, we had a couple of YouTube videos up about a tax strategy or something like that. And so we took this YouTube video out and put it on a podcasting platform. And I think there's like 4 videos that we just did back to back to back, and then just kind of let it sit there. And 6 months later, we get someone reach out to our website and say, hey, I heard your podcast. I'm interested in learning more about your services. And I'm like, podcast? What are they even talking about? And it started dawning. It's like, oh, we put those episodes up that long ago. And so that was kind of our trigger of saying, hey, people are finding you. We didn't do anything to try to get people to find us, but people are finding us. And after listening to just 4 things we had to say, they're interested in working with us. And so that was our key of saying, okay, we're going to try to do this more continuously, be very methodic with it, and start to do weekly episodes. And so it started out tough. I mean, when you start out something, you're rusty, you're not that experienced in it. And I would say, if you listen to some of our beginning episodes, they're short, they're not that good. I probably recorded them 30 different times to try to get it perfectly. And now it's just, set up and go. I know that there's going to be mistakes, and I don't have to be perfect, and our listeners don't expect me to be perfect. And so I just get that product out there, the information out there. But really with the podcast, so, we started off from nothing to kind of where we are today. And it just continues to grow over and over. But I think the key thing about that is that my goal always is to just, you can hear about tax strategies out there and they just say, well, you can go hire your kids, pay no taxes on it. And, it's a great tax deduction. And everyone's like, well, okay, but what do I do? What does that mean? How do I do it? How do I do this correctly? What do I need to be, what do I need to know about this? In so many articles out there just don't go deeper into that. And so that was always kind of my mission, is that with the podcast and the blog posts that we're going along with the podcast, we want to make sure that there's enough information there that somebody can run with it. Someone can take it, they can go implement that strategy if they want to. They may need to do a little bit of research on how it perfectly fits for them, but they have enough information that they can run with also it not being too complicated. Like they're not having to try to understand tax law and all that to be able to do that. And so that's really kind of been the mission on the podcast. And that is something that has evolved over time too. How do we take this information and I'm not speaking to other CPAs or other accountants, but I'm speaking to small business owners, and how do I take that information so it's easy for them to understand and implement as well?
I think that's really important. Just thinking of, like, some people say like, oh, don't give too much information away because you want to work with them, where I really appreciate your approach of actually saying, like, going deeper and taking them to that next step that they actually can do it themselves. And I feel when people feel that they're going to be more connected and maybe reach out to actually work with you if they do need assistance, because you gave them everything that you could to help them succeed. And having the good intentions, I think, is really important with that as well. So for people listening that are interested and maybe find you, tell us where they can connect with you online and maybe work with you.
Yeah, you can find our podcast on any podcasting platform. Just type in small business tax savings podcast. We also have a website that has all of our podcast episodes and blog posts that go along with each episode, and everything about our tax minimization program. That is www.taxsavingspodcast.com.
Awesome. And I always like to finish off my episodes with one final piece of advice that you would like to leave listeners thinking about after this conversation. What would it be?
Yeah, the biggest thing, and this is not necessarily tax related, but just something I learned along my journey, is that, when you're starting to grow your business, the key thing is to not get stuck too deep into your business. And so that you're just continuously, you're trying to grow, but you can't grow because you are the bottleneck. You are that person that's waiting on. And so hiring early is I think important for small business owners. But the other thing about hiring early that I think that I didn't have in my mindset is that you expect to hire someone that's just going to replicate you. You expect to hire someone that's just going to take what you're doing and do it exactly the same way. And if you have that mindset, you're going to be so disappointed when you start to hire people. And so I always say, when you start to hire employees, which you should always be doing to try to get more and more administrative work and tasks off your plate so you can work on growing your business. When you start to do that, just be aware, have that mindset that, hey, they might work at a 70% of what you do. You're the business owner, you're the expert. Expect your employees to maybe work at 70% of what you do. And if they come up and work at 80 or 90, or they are better than you at what you do, great. But at least your expectations are not, hey, they're going to be better than me, or they're going to be doing exactly the same way I did things, because they might bring a new taste to that table that you didn't think about. And now you're much more efficient than even you were. And so it's just having that open mindset when hiring employees. Otherwise, people get frustrated. They want to grow. They just want to say, okay, I'm going to take this little piece off my plate, hire somebody, but that person doesn't do it exactly. They get frustrated. And they're like, okay, I'm going to bring it back into house. And this is a cycle that I went through into my entire career. And it was finally getting to that point of, okay, how do I sit back and release, trust that I'm going to hire the right people and that person's going to do their expectations, but also not expect them to do it exactly how I would.
I think that's great advice. And I think everyone can apply that to their lives in some way. So yeah, that's awesome. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing some of your business and your work with us today. And hopefully those that feel your message and everything resonates with them, they'll find you. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Shelby, thanks for having me.